Okay, I'm gonna start. Hey everybody, thanks for coming back to season 2 of Devs Play, where we play games with the developers of those games. Especially this season, we're looking at games that either inspired Psychonauts 1 or might inspire Psychonauts 2, or are just in that milieu, if you would forgive my French, of brightly colored, stylized art, platformers, and games of that era that we're harkening back to. And we have a very special guest today, Mr. Jason Rubin, creator of Crash Bandicoot.
Hello.
Right there, Jason. Good. Thanks for coming in.
I'm honored that you would say that we might have inspired a Psychonauts. Or any Psychonauts. That's an honor to have been.
That's awesome. You know we're doing 2 right now.
Yes, I do know that.
We did that.
I'm very
like
excited about that. Yeah.
and there are all these. People talk about genres being gone, like adventure games and stuff, but people don't, I feel like, talk enough about the 3D character-driven platformer with stylized art, you know, and like, especially ones that are like kind of happy looking, you know, and so I was going to ask you a little bit about that and the state of that and what could be done to make those, you know, exciting again to the world.
Well, it's a really good question. I was just having this conversation with somebody from Rockstar of all groups, and what ended up happening to us, we clearly took inspiration from Sonic and Mario and Donkey Kong Country, actually. If you look at the level layouts we did, it's very Donkey Kong Country. And there was just this heyday of the character action game owning everything. And Crash fell directly into that, and the expansion on the CD, graphics getting better. It was like the perfect moment. With Jak and Daxter, we were expanding that into, you know, something a little deeper, something a little longer. And Jak came out to great reception, and just as its sales curve started kind of spiking up, and as the Crash of the day, which we didn't do, was coming down, it launched better because it had the name Crash, but the game kind of wasn't good and went down. We were spiking up. This Grand Theft Auto 3 thing came out and utterly changed the expectations of the gaming community. And like literally overnight, everything changed. We had already started working on Jak 2, and I remember doing a focus group and 2 8-year-olds were in this focus group. And I was like, so what do you think? And they acted like 16-year-olds, like 8-year-olds. Well, the graphics are good, and we really like the gameplay. We like what you're doing and the expansion of the universe. Really, this would be a fantastic game for our little brothers. And you're like, you're 8. What are you playing? Grand Theft Auto.
Yeah.
And it just changed everything.
Focus groups changed everything.
Well, but it taught you that, you know, the expectations of the world were different.
Yeah.
So I remember going to Shuhei at Sony and saying, Shu, I don't know that we're doing the right thing here. Maybe we should do an adult character. Maybe we should do a character action game based on, you know, something that's a little more mature. And he said, I love Jak and Daxter. Do you love Jak and Daxter? Of course I love Jak and Daxter. Do you think we can do more with Jak and Daxter? Of course we can do more with Jak and Daxter. Well, let's continue the series. And that's why, if you look, Jak 2 he had a gun. He kind of cursed. Like, he did all the things that we were like trying to grab onto as much of the world as we could. And then over time, it just became obvious that the right thing to do next was something more like Uncharted and something less like fruity character.
So you were ready to do Uncharted right after Jak, or right in the middle of Jak 2.
It wouldn't have been Uncharted, to be clear. It would have been something utterly different. But we were ready to attack the adult human character with guns or, you know, with an attitude, as opposed to the fuzzy, happy, friendly creatures that at that time had kind of been the past. And now you ask what today's character. I think we've gotten to the point where people are like, okay, I get it. You can kill things in all kinds of ways, and there's probably a space for these games to come back and be just fun. Because they are.
Yeah, I think there is that thing of like exploring how far we can go or what we can do, or can these things be, they can definitely be adult now. I think pretty much we've explored content that goes as far as you can.
It's no longer novel, certainly, right?
Yeah.
I mean, adult
well, now I think this is novel.
This is novel and kitschy in many ways.
So we're going to play both Crash today, and later on we'll play Jak in a separate episode.
And I'm probably going to embarrass myself because it's been many years since I've played
We'll have a trained professional playing it.
Okay, good.
So you don't have to, all you do is talk about it. So that's really, all that stuff you said was really interesting. I was going to ask you about that, because I remember, we can talk about this, I won't name it, there was a secret cabal, secret business list. Do you remember that mailing list we were on?
Yep.
And you talked about some of those things at the time, and I remember seeing your thoughts about Jak and that talk about that focus group, and I was really depressed by that. I was like, the people who should like these kind of games are almost pretending they don't, because they want to be like the older kids. Yeah.
And I think that stigma's gone too now. If you're a broad gamer, you play a broad number of types of games, everything from AAA hardcore action to something that's much more indie and much more stylish and perhaps a little bit historic like this. So that's a good thing. The industry should mature to that, right? That's great.
Yeah, I think it's no longer like, I think even the name hardcore implies there's like a core or one center, and then everything kind of radiates out for that in lesser degrees of intensity.
Yep.
But there's so many cores. They're like people who are really hardcore about their DS. You know what I mean? They're really hardcore about their Animal Crossing game.
Totally.
Or they're really hardcore in different ways, or they're really into Japanese RPGs and they're super hardcore about that, even though they have really brightly colored graphics and things like that. So I don't think people think anymore that you have to be dark and gritty looking to be hardcore. You don't have to have a limited palette and all be brown and, you know.
The industry has become much more diverse since Crash was made, and that's a very good thing. On all levels, that's a good thing. Funding is also, as you know, becoming more diverse now. You don't have to go to a publisher.
Yeah, that's a lot of exciting things going on in funding these days.
Fantastic for indies, fantastic for games in general, because big studios, they're not going to make certain types of games that have every right to exist and are a hell of a lot of fun.
So can you put some context for me, like, who were you at the time? What was the industry doing, and what was your company? This was not your first game, right?
This was definitely not our first game. This game started in 1990. Crash started 1994. Andy and I sold our first video game in 1985, so this was almost 10 years later.
Wow.
And we were working with Electronic Arts and released their third Genesis title. You know, in that would have been like 91 or something. So we had done a decent number of titles. Rings of Power.
Rings of Power.
I think it was the third greenlit, but it ended up releasing later because it was a huge title and it took two guys a long time to
And what was
finish.
your background? Did you study programming in college, or
Not at all.
business, or something else?
No, I started making games when my father bought me a computer after I begged for years to make it at 13. I was a horrible programmer, but obviously back then one person made the whole game.
Yeah.
I took a skiing game that I had done in a weekend, which graphically was okay for the times, but it slowed down as you went downhill because I was bad at coding. To Andy, my friend at the time, and Andy cleaned it up in an hour, and from that point on, he was the programmer, I was the artist.
Wait, you were how old when you knew Andy?
Andy and I met when I was 13, and we published that game when we were 15 with a
awesome.
small company. And at 17, like I said, we were contracted with Electronic Arts to make games.
Man, that's awesome. And then when Ted was here, he told a story of actually being, I think it was like in the building, both pitching. You were talking about Way of the Warrior.
Yes.
And he was pitching
Disruptor. Yeah, we had. So Andy and I, these are long stories, but
we got time. You got
sweet.
the day off,
All right.
right?
So
All right.
Rings of Power took 3 years. Basically, most of my college and most of Andy's college, we did Rings of Power, and it was a big cartridge game. And they printed 48,000 cartridges, and it sold out within a couple of weeks. And we got a call from EA. They said, "Good news, bad news. Good news is you're sold out." Awesome. Like, that's great. You're a gamer. You're sold out. There was no digital download, so literally no one could get
But
the
we only
game.
printed 3 of them.
Right. And bad news, we're not going to print anymore. What? Like, you're a publisher. Why wouldn't you print anymore? Well, we're limited in the number of cartridges that we can print by Sega. They only can print so many. And there's this other game out there that's doing really well that doesn't have an EEPROM, doesn't have the same amount of RAM that you have, or ROM that you have. It's a cheaper cartridge, so our profit is greater. It's called Madden. And we were like, oh, this really sucks. So after spending 3 years on a title and selling out, they didn't print anymore. So
As a publisher, they could only do so many cartridges.
Sega would only let them print so many
up.
cartridges because there was only so much that Sega could print. Like, there was a limit to the number of cartridges they could print. So they would allocate out to the various publishers, here's how much you can print, here's how much you could print, and then the publishers got to choose what they did. They knew they would sell Madden out, they knew they would sell Rings of Power out. Madden was a cheaper cartridge. So for every Madden they did, they make more money. It was a very easy business decision. But it screwed Andy and I. So we decided to get out of gaming. I went off to California to learn how to surf, and I started in the special effects industry, and actually got the offer to do the transformation sequence for the movie Wolf with Jack Nicholson, and it was a big movie, yeah.
And James Spader,
which had a horrible transformation sequence. So
Wait, you did do that? Or
I
you didn't?
did not do it.
Oh, it would have been better.
I got
if you
the contract in front of me, and we got a call from Trip Hawkins, who said, "I'm doing this 3DO thing. Great news. I know we screwed you in the past, but this is a CD. We can print as many of them as we want. You won't get screwed. Take a look at it." And we looked at it, and we're game makers to death to us. So we immediately started making this game called Way of the Warrior. But we decided we were always indie, but that was our real indie moment. We said, to hell with the publishers. We're not going to let them control our destiny. We're going to put our own money into this. Everything we had earned on Way of the Warrior, all our bar mitzvah money, everything is going into this game. And I moved to Boston because Andy was at MIT, and literally put every dollar I had to the point where I couldn't afford a light bulb and was eating ramen every night.
In the dark.
In the dark, right? Into Way of the Warrior. Sold the stereo,
Your bar mitzvah money.
Like literally every penny we had. We didn't borrow money, which is
that's smart.
right. But we put every dollar into it, and we spent $10,000 getting a booth at CES.
Oh my God, that's big time
huge,
for
huge
people with no light bulbs eating.
Right, that was our
ramen in the dark
biggest
with no
single
music.
line item. Showed up at E3 in a 3x3 foot area, and we had the only 3DO game that wasn't some stupid multimedia, video with some B actor that somebody had put together, thinking this is what you want out
Were
of
you in
CES.
Kensha Hall, the little hall? Really?
No, we weren't.
Oh,
we were in the 3DO
proper-
booth. We were in the,
in the 3DO booth.
They let us buy a 3x3, like they let all the publishers buy. And all the publishers were saying, look at our stupid multimedia thing with these horrible actors.
FMV and yep.
Totally, and FMV at low resolution. I mean, you can imagine what the.
You had some
here's a real fighting
photorealistic
game.
stuff, but like it was like Mortal Kombat.
It was a game, yeah. It was a Mortal Kombat ripoff. I actually apologized to Boone many years later. Spoken to him a few times later. He said, "It's all right. We all stand on shoulders, right?" So yeah.
And then you ripped the spine off with it. No, sorry.
So long story short, bidding war started to get this real game that nobody had, no publisher had, and 3DO was a bidder, Crystal Dynamics was a bidder, they were a big publisher at the time, and Universal Studios was the winner. And they said, what would you do next? Because the game was done, and I said, well, we'd probably hire employees, and we would want $2 million to make this game. And they said,
wow.
okay, here's $2 million.
What year was that?
And that's Crash, 94.
$2 million in '94. That's pretty good. That's a good negotiator.
I just picked the number out of the sky, and we ended up with 8 employees.
I would have gone
$2
for the
million.
light bulb and then the stereo. but
Well, we got that too. We
Yeah.
actually got paid.
that's the difference in you and me. You thought of going for $2 million, but I would have gone for.
Well, they said ask whatever you want. And that was the biggest number I could think of.
Yeah.
It was like
Did it end up costing more than that, or did
2.1 million. I had to borrow, and I had to convince them to give us another $100,000. So I was right on budget.
So, and then can I quote some things from your Wikipedia article?
Of course, which is probably half true, but go
Probably
for
half
it.
true. The original name is a Wombat, and
one of
Wally the Wombat.
Yeah. One of the hardest things of a character action game is naming the characters, especially when the character is also going to be the name of the game on the box, right? It's not just a character name, it's actually the name. We picked Willy Wombat because it sounded like the kind of name you couldn't fall in love with and had to be replaced.
Oh, like a bad.
It was a bad name. And in the process of choosing names, got attached to it. And thank God that we came up with Crash Bandicoot, which was Taylor Kurosaki and Dave Baggett, two of the Naughty Dogs, came up with the name.
You really think it would not have been successful under Willy the Wombat?
Well, there was a Willy Wombat, and you can look at its sales.
There was one.
There actually was one that came out. That was the other thing that happened, is somebody must have either heard the name or coincidentally picked it, and they went with it, and it did not
not
do
just
well.
made another Wombat game, but made a game specifically called Willy the Wombat.
That came out about the same time, if I remember
crazy.
correctly. Yeah. So
It would have been weird too that it's Way of the Warrior, Willy the Wombat.
sure, it would have been a W.
You're obviously
trifecta,
every single game you made after that would have to be 2 W's.
which would get hard after
Yeah,
a
it would
while.
get
Because it's
super
not
hard.
exactly the best letter to have gotten fall into.
And it was said also on that page that the marketing director tried to get you called like Wuzzles or Wizzles the Wombat. These are all true.
These are all true. The one that I remember her really fighting for was Wes Wombat. She was not our favorite
We
person.
similarly, where our publisher tried to get us to change the name of Raz in Psychonauts to be Skid. It was the marketing guy. He was like, "What about Skid?" And I was like a skid mark. Like
Skid mark,
like
yeah, right.
Like what a dog does on a carpet, or what do you? And he's like, "No, this has got to be it." I'm like, just you can't.
Look, names are really hard.
Yeah.
Jack and Daxter took 4 months to come up with Crash's name. It took longer to come up with Jack and Daxter's names. Like
Yeah.
those just
That's 2
they're
names.
really hard. Yeah. Daxter was easy, if I remember correctly. Jack was the hard one, right?
Yeah.
The thing about Daxter is we knew that everyone would kind of hate him because he had this annoying personality, so the name could be annoying. But the hero is
Yeah, like main characters are always hard to write and to name because you want so hard to make people like them, but if you try really hard to make something likable, it just becomes bland and like it's like your secondary characters people always like more, or your villains people like more because they can do whatever they want. They can be annoying or they can just have fun, but your main character is like just playing like me all the time.
So one of my greatest mistakes on Jack and Daxter is that I pushed not to have Jack speak for precisely that reason. I thought, you are Jack. If you hear Jack talk, he cracks a joke you don't like, that puts distance between you and the character. We had people on the team that had come from Gex. Gex talked too much, clearly, right? If you remember Gex. So
He's later got a job at the GEICO, right? At least he bounced back.
Or that was his cousin or something. So yeah, I didn't want Jack to talk, and that was definitely a mistake because again, we were getting better at what we were doing as game makers, and we were fully capable with the hardware of doing a well-realized voice with a professional voice actor. And so Jack 2, he talked. Jack 3, he talked more, and clearly by the time they got to Uncharted, we were done with the main character not talking thing.
Yeah, I love how Drake talks. It was like he kind of the way he mutters a little bit while he's fighting too. All that stuff. Like it's not. You worry that it's going to be like you're saying. It would put a distance between you. You want to have your character be a blank slate, but I don't believe that at all. You play GoldenEye, and you're wearing a tuxedo and you're James Bond. It feels cool. You don't feel like, why? I'm not really James Bond.
Well, I think when the graphics look like Crash graphics, and you only had so much space, and the voice acting was always going to be compressed down, and we couldn't afford to get a good one anyway. Nor did we know what a good voice actor was because we had always been making games without voices. It was hard, and something like Gex could happen, which was spending too much money on a comedian that talked too much during the game and basically ruin what was otherwise a pretty good character action game. So we were afraid of it, but as time progressed, game makers got better, and clearly now we have the capability of doing a character equally as compelling to any film.
We've all made the mistake of thinking, I'm going to write 3 lines of dialogue for this boss fight, and it'll just repeat once in a while you're fighting. You don't really think about someone spending, like, they're stuck on that puzzle, and they hear that one line over and over and over. Anyway, that's the whole thing.
Yep.
I read another thing, that someone called it Sonic's ass.
That is absolutely true. That's 100% true. The concept for Crash Bandicoot was, Andy and I had succeeded with Way and the Warrior, even though the game didn't do well, and basically kind of taking the fighting game and putting it on a platform that didn't have a fighting game, because at the time there was no fighting game on the 3DO. So our concept was, let's take a genre to a platform that doesn't have a game for it yet. And obviously there was Sonic and Sega, and obviously Nintendo was well taken care of in the character action. So we had already started thinking, let's do a character action game for Sony, which was rumored to be bringing out hardware. Additionally, we knew it had to be in 3D, and there had been 3D racing games that were very successful, Virtua Racer, there were 3D fighting games, Virtua Fighter, and others that were starting to happen, but nobody had taken the character action game into 3D. So we started talking about how you would do that, and because of the fact that all we could think of is a digital pad being the input device, and in fact, it is a D-pad that the PlayStation 1 shipped with, not the analog stick, and notice he's playing with the D-pad even though there's an analog stick. Because of that, we didn't want to do a free roaming character. We wanted it to go in, out, left, and right, because we had had this horrible experience in Way of the Warrior with the kind of 45-degree angles failing on the controller, so you couldn't do the shuriken move without undoing the screws in the back. True story. If you wanted to play a 3DO, you undid the screws in the back. You got a better joypad. Yeah.
Like once in a while, you just had to.
You had to. Wow. You bought it from the store. You undid the screws. You got a better experience. And we would actually. There's no way of disseminating this information. But by the way, this may be the first forced runner into the screen. So we're gonna take credit for Temple Run and all those things.
That's true, Temple Run. And then when you're running at the camera, it made me think of even like the latest Uncharted. I think has a.
Do they?
Well, at least the one before had one where you're running away from that giant half-track thing coming down the alley.
So anyway, we knew in, out, left, right. Those were the controls we had. So we started designing it and realized that in was going to be the direction you did the most, just like you're doing here, into the screen. And you're going to be looking at the ass of the character. And because we were talking about Sonic, which was the king of the hill at the time, we kind of titled it Sonic's ass, because that's what we figured you'd be looking at. And indeed, we have a great shot of Crash's ass here.
Yeah, that's why you put all the polys right there, I see.
And the reason he has spots on his back and everything else is flat shaded. There's no other textures on Crash except for his pupils. And his sneaker tops, which we didn't want to spend the polys. But we had to put the spots on the back and the spike on the head, because otherwise you'd be looking at this flat orange back the entire time. It's also the reason he starts by looking at you.
Yeah, he's always winking at you.
Because otherwise you'd never see his face. You'd always be looking at his ass. So yes, all these little things we did to make the Sonic's ass game less assy.
You took all Sonic's ass out. That's awesome.
By the way, Miyamoto basically said to Nintendo, as I understand it, I need an analog stick. Nintendo launched with an analog stick. That's why he's free roaming and we're in, out, left, right. They put an analog stick very quickly into the PlayStation. That's why Spyro works, because Spyro has now the analog stick with which to do the free roaming.
You were the bleeding edge.
But we were
the controllers. But you hit that technical challenge and you invented new stuff with it, right? You rose to the challenge.
We invented new stuff that, yeah, I think over time it became obvious that the free roaming was going to be a much more compelling experience, but we were, technically challenged. And these games are very well balanced because we know exactly where you're going to go, and you can't avoid things like you can in free roamers.
And also, free roaming games had a lot of camera challenges that took years to sort out.
That's
and,
right.
And took a lot of code to make work. And just when you watch someone else play one, the camera's whipping around so much you can get really sick. And there's a lot of people who really don't enjoy the navigation of a really open space like that. They get confused. You have to do a lot of signposting, like come over here, and you don't have any of those problems here, right?
Yeah, it was a very broad audience. People always knew what they needed to do next. You can stop and wait for the. In fact, if you watch a novice player play, they'll stop in front of the pits. They'll think about the pits. They'll jump over the pit, but they know exactly what task needs to be solved. Whereas in an open game, it's a little bit more difficult.
Now, where am I?
Mario 64 was very open, right? It didn't have that much to do. It was the joy of kind of running around in this open space. But as you started to layer on more and more stuff in the free roaming world, a certain segment of the population doesn't like it, can't handle it. These games were the ultimate, anyone could play kind of games.
And there's another part of the lore of Crash is that, and I know this is true, but this is something that developers will toss around when we talk about porting our games to Japanese. They'll be like, you can't have a hit over there. Like you can't. Western developers can never have a hit in Japan. They're like, well, Crash Bandicoot. And for a while, it was always tossed around as the only hit in Japan of a Western developer. Is that pretty true? Did you feel like you guys were?
Well, before cell phones and digital downloads, which changed everything, and now there are very successful products in Japan, but unit sales means less and whatever. Crash was the most successful foreign title to ever have been released in Japan. So I know that's not the case anymore. But when you had to put something in a box and everything was console, this was the best selling. It was the third one of these that sold, I think, 1.5 million units.
Was it so successful that it got a TV show, or was it a TV show? Which came first in Japan?
The game definitely came first.
There was a TV show, right?
The game came first. Sony America sent a bunch of people to take a look at the game because these are all long stories, right? We were one of the few developers that had signed with Sony. So mostly publishers signed with Sony. And we had a developer deal, which they got rid of within 6 months of starting the PlayStation. The major difference between a publisher deal and a developer deal is publishers had to show Sony their games before they started and get approval. Developers, because they couldn't publish without a publisher, could go off and do whatever they wanted. So we loved our developer deal because we developed Crash until Alpha with Universal, with Mark Cerny at Universal, without telling Sony anything. So all of a sudden, Mario's about to get announced. They know it's going to E3, and here's this Crash Bandicoot game. So Sony America sent down Kelly Flock to take a look at the game.
And from LucasArts?
Yeah, but I don't know if it was previous or after, but at the time he was at Sony. And he was at THQ later on. And Kelly saw this and realized this is our Mario killer. So in any event, Sony saw this, said we have to put this front and center. I don't remember what it was, but they booted something at E3 off the stage right across from Mario, and this game went there, and I've now forgotten the question you asked, but what was it?
Was it about the TV show?
Right.
How that came to be?
So Sony America was all hot and heavy on it. That was Bernie Stolar. And Sony Japan said, we're not so sure we want to really focus on this title, and they sent over this long spreadsheet they had made of the comparisons between the titles, and they had a point system. Mario, Sonic, I think Knights actually by that time.
Bandicoot.
Well, the number one thing was basically translates into Gaijin, wasn't made by a Japanese. We got a -1, and Miyamoto got a +1 on that ranking because we were not Japanese. And so there was a clear Japanese-centric focus on these companies. And they continued to send over producers who would look at the game and go, oh, he's just so aggressive, it's just not cute, it doesn't work. And I remember going out.
Cute?
Not for the Japanese.
Shoes.
He wasn't Mario.
Okay.
So I remember specifically the senior Japanese executives sitting in Naughty Dog's offices and just shaking their heads, and I could tell we were going to get a "this is not coming out in Japan." So we took a lunch break, and I ran out to Charlotte Francis, who was our lead texture artist, and also did. And I said, "Do me a favor, take his eyes, make them in the little black and white Pac-Man. Close his mouth, whatever you have to do. I don't want teeth. I don't want an aggressive stare. I want a cute smile. Round him out a little bit.
Teeth.
Bingo. He starts with teeth. So
he's all points.
And get me a sketch. And Charlotte, as quickly as she could, did it. We came back from lunch. I put that sketch in front of the Sony Japanese representatives, and they looked at it, and they looked up and smiled. And Crash became a big part of the international launch from that single sketch. And they put a producer who I think was a junior producer on the time on making sure that the entire game was appropriate for Japan, and that producer's name was Shuhei Yoshida.
Oh, that's awesome.
So that's how the process
But he doesn't
went.
have the little crescent moon.
He does in Japan.
Oh, enjoy. Is
In
there a
Japan,
different Crash?
there
in
is a
Japan?
different Crash.
Is he rounder?
He doesn't change that much because we didn't have the technical ability to do that at the time. It would have taken too long.
It's loading the
but his
Rolling Stones.
eyes are different. His teeth are different. He had specific animations that were just for Japan. Aku Aku will come out and speak to you and give you hints and tips that he doesn't in the United States. There were death animations that were deemed too aggressive for the Japanese market that were taken out. Including there was one where Crash gets stomped and it's two shoes and his head and he's walking around. There had been a
That's classic Bugs Bunny right there.
classic. There had been a serial killing spree in Japan, and they were
Squishing people with a
The
safe?
guy was leaving heads and shoes in the front of classrooms, so that was taken out. Like there were all these subtle little things that we did for the Japanese market.
I'm going to be processing that story for a little
Yes,
while.
this is how things go. This is the
They're going to
international
add
game
a
business.
little drop-in picture of a grisly murder scene.
These
photo,
are
right?
the dirty truths of the back end of the game business, is that it's a much more complicated thing than just making a game if you want it to sell. And Sony's marketing campaign was utterly different than that in the West. Crash was aggressive, sly, cool in the United States. In Japan, he was very cute. The dance that he does came from Japanese marketing. Like everything was just different for Japan.
I totally want to see that version now. And you don't feel, since it was a big hit in Japan, do you feel like they knew what they were doing?
They absolutely knew.
Those changes were what they needed to do.
Oh, absolutely. We owe all of our success in Japan to the Japanese publishing and marketing group, Shu, and the people that we're working with.
So if I visit Japan, I shouldn't show my teeth too much and should not be very aggressive, is what you're saying.
It was a game style thing,
Yeah.
I still don't know that that's a Grand Theft Auto audience.
Yeah.
And it was what it was at the time, and it worked. Whatever they did, it worked. We could all argue whether or not it was the right or wrong thing to do, or whether or not Japanese culture at the time asked for it or not, but it did work. So using that as the metric of judging success, it was successful.
We were told different things by our publisher, which I never knew were true, which like, well, our animators should put fewer fingers on
Yes,
Raz.
I know. You couldn't have 5 fingers. I'm sorry, you couldn't have 4 fingers
that's what they
because
told
of the Yakuza.
Yeah.
Because they chop off a finger. So Crash had mitts, and we got away with that one.
Oh, he had mitts.
But in the
Like
marketing,
mitts.
in the marketing materials, he always had 5 fingers.
Yeah,
not
we
4.
added a drone finger, and then we never came out in Japan. So,
But yeah, that was a big one. Like that one was known across, all of the companies.
Oh,
You can see
mitts.
with the
Look at
mitts
those.
that we
yeah, what is he hiding?
532 polygons Crash. I modeled them.
503. Wait, you modeled Crash?
I modeled Crash and animated
The
Crash.
final Crash?
Yeah, the final Crash, and animated it.
Are you also the level designer?
I designed a few of the levels, probably the worst of them. We had, in Crash 1, this game is not as well balanced as 2 and 3. We had kind of a roundhouse of submit your ideas. The second game was much more designed by Mark Cerny than the first one. And he is a fantastic level designer. And the third game, we had kind of gotten on pace, so we knew how to make a good level by that time. Evan Wells had joined the company and did it.
He was a lot taller than Mario. Was that a conscious thing that's just the way he turned out? Like he's not like a lot of those.
I don't know.
I guess
if he
Sonic's a
is.
little taller than Mario, right?
I don't know if he is taller than Mario. What I do know is that years later I read, and I've been looking for it ever since. So if anyone can find this article, please tweet me and let me know that you found it. But there was an article someone wrote about the hang times of character action game characters when jumping.
Yeah.
And it was a bell curve. And at the middle of the bell curve, Crash and Mario have about the same hang time and the most success. As the hang times get longer and the character feels floaty, the success of the character goes down.
Oh, man.
And as they get shorter, you can't for whatever reason, also sales go down. So Crash and Mario happened, and we didn't know this. It was just trial and error.
I am going to measure this right now. We're
Yeah,
gonna
had
do
about the same hang
exactly
time.
what these two characters do. We're just going to copy that. Because that's pretty much, then everything else is just gravy. Once you get the hang time.
Yeah, it's a guaranteed success. Yeah,
So
right
who
hang
made the
time.
TV show? And what was that like?
So TV show. This one I don't know of a TV show. I know there were a lot of comic
Crash?
books. Yeah.
I had heard there was a Crash TV show. It was like Saturday morning cartoons, and that helped
In Japan?
Yeah.
I know there was a bunch of anime that we did with Koro, which was a huge magazine then. I don't
Well,
remember
you would
a
know.
TV
I
show.
would
I
assume
know-
you would know if there was one made.
Well,
but
you
I was
know,
told there.
You
there was
have to
one.
also remember the fact that after the four crashes we did, including the racing game, that we moved on and games kept coming out. So there easily could have been something that happened after that time. But while I was working on Crash, I do not remember a television show.
Did it sim ship in Japan?
Yeah.
Okay, so it's not like it came up later and
No.
there's a TV show then.
No,
You did it! You got past that. Oh my God! High five! That was awesome.
Crash had a very heavy balancing system because we had new people coming to 3D games that had never played before, and then hardcore gamers, and we wanted a game everyone could play. So the mask will come out if you die too many times on a level. Aku Aku will just spawn automatically, giving you an extra life. And also the boxes change what's in them based on how well you're doing, and the boulder will slow down. So in theory, if you duct tape the controller so that it will continually run away from the boulder but eventually die, and leave it overnight, the boulder should be going pretty damn slow in the morning.
It won't. You won't finish it with the rubber band on the controller.
No.
But it's easier.
Well, the boulder goes slower and slower, so once the boulder gets to a certain speed, it's no longer a challenge, and then you can take the time to do the jumps. These were my design, and I'm not sure these were the best of ideas, these twisting logs. They were a challenge.
I see that idea. That's working. I say, don't worry about it. I'm sure this game will do
I
well.
definitely was the worst of the level designers, though. That was not my strong suit. I was good at balancing and not good at doing the level design. And in fact, the Road to Nowhere, which you may or may not get to today, probably not, started as a level that probably would have been impossible for a human being to solve. And someone else came in and fixed it.
Look at that.
Just
Cute? I think he's cute, just for the record. Adorable.
We stored every location of every vertex individually, so that kind of death was possible where he pixelizes into his various frames, and I had to animate every one of those little things because physics and all that wasn't really done back then.
It's a lot
So
of
yeah,
math.
looking at this, just remember the amount of work.
Well, tough luck, Wally the Wombat.
Willie.
Where is he now? Where's Willy the Wombat now?
No
Gone.
idea.
Not here. And Crash is here. Okay, so thanks for watching, and stay tuned next for Jack and Baxter.
Cool.
Awesome.